Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week, I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and I am talking to Ayush Newatia. Did I get anywhere close on your name?
Close enough.
Coming to us all the way from London. And I ran across Ayush. I don't remember if we bumped into each other over something else or if I reached out about the Rails and Hotwire codecs or something else. I've been getting into Hotwire quite a bit. Most of what I've done is Stimulus, but I'm starting to pick up Turbo, and I'm definitely interested in seeing what Strata can do for me. But yeah, so the codecs, it looks like is it a course or is it a book? It looks like it's a book.
It's a book, yeah. It's an ebook. It's a comprehensive ebook that I got it printed just for keepsake, and it's honestly more like a brick than a book.
Oh wow, it's that big, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it says written by human, not by AI, which, wow, you did it in hard mode, huh?
Oh yeah, I don't believe in shortcuts.
Yeah, well, sometimes the shortcuts help, but yeah, I've seen people that they do most, or they have AI do like 99% of the work, and yeah, they miss stuff, or the AI gets stuff wrong that they don't catch, or any number of other issues. Yeah, so you got to write the book you wanted, I guess, is what I'm aiming at. So
Yeah, pretty much. Like a lot of the stuff in the book I was actually learning while writing, and I find that the best way to learn is to do it on what you called hard mode, because you tend to go down dead ends, you go down other paths, and you make mistakes, and you learn from all those things.
right.
You learn things you didn't expect to learn, and for me, that's the right way to go about it, because that gives you a lot more context than just asking an AI a question and getting an answer back that you can't actually be sure is accurate or
Right.
not.
Yeah, I like that too. The kind of the idea of learning as you go. And I wrote a book about finding a job. I feel like things have shifted some, so I need to rewrite it. But it was the way that I found jobs for the first 15 years of my career. And it was interesting, like going back and seeing what was out there today and how that worked and stuff like that. And so I feel that quite a bit. But yeah, it's tough. Writing a book's a ton of work.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I thought it was going to be pretty hard, and it was way harder than I
Oh
imagined it
yeah.
would be. It took about twice as long as I had anticipated it to take. Um, yeah, it was quite an undertaking. It's definitely the most challenging thing I've ever done in my professional
Uh-huh.
career, and but so far it's also been the most rewarding. So I took 8 months completely off client work to write it,
Oh wow.
because I'm a freelancer, and I was trying to do it side by side with client work, and it just wasn't working for me, because writing is quite an
Right.
mentally intense task. And after spending like 4 or 5 hours a day on client work, I just didn't have enough in the tank to then put in some proper hours for writing. So I was like, "Hey, while I'm still excited about this idea, let me try and see it through. I'll take 3 or 4 months off. Surely that'll be enough to write it." And 8 months later, I still hadn't finished it. So it was quite a big financial hit, but um, in the long term, I think it's all been quite worth it, because it's really helped my freelancing career as well.
That's awesome. So um the book goes into all kinds of stuff. I'm assuming it also does Turbo Native.
It does, yeah. So it's well, I mean, I would say this, but I think it's the most comprehensive resource out there on Rails and Hotwire, because it covers all the bits. Like, it is primarily a book on how to build a Rails app, but
Uh-huh.
where it kind of does things that other courses and books don't is it firstly does quite a lot from scratch. So like I use very few gems, so like authentication, all that stuff is from scratch. And the other thing is
Oh wow.
it teaches native apps as well. So it's not just build a Rails website, it's build a Rails website, iOS app, and Android app.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Yeah, we had Joe Mazzolotti on a while back to talk about Turbo Native, and it looks really terrific as far as it goes. And I mean, I've talked to some people and they just want that native, full on native experience where you load the data onto the phone, so you're hitting APIs and then you're you know loading native components and stuff like that. But some apps. So the thing that I've been looking at is building like a media app for podcasts and videos and stuff like that. Um, I guess you can have your media downloadable, to the point where you can watch it on the phone on a more, I guess, native app. But for the most part, if people are going to stream it, I don't see what the difference is, right?
Yeah, honestly, I think there is a huge misunderstanding around the actual benefits of native apps. Like
Right.
for some use cases, they are the best tool for the job, but for a vast majority of use cases, a well executed hybrid app will do the job really well. Because a lot of the arguments I usually hear for native apps is things like offline use
Right.
and just the fidelity of the UI and things like that. But I used to be a native app developer, so I only switched to Rails in 2020. Before that, I spent 5 years doing iOS and Android development, and
Uh,
worked on a few apps first at an agency, and then I worked for a company called TransferWise, now known as Wise.
mhm.
And our dirty little secret was that the apps were fully native, but they were useless offline. They were completely and utterly useless offline. Like, I can't comment on the state of the app now, obviously, because I left the company 5 years ago. But
Right.
when I worked there, uh, every screen made like a minimum of half a dozen API calls and then rendered native views based on those API calls.
Yeah.
So you got any screen, you will see a loading spinner. It's not going to load instantly. There is no offline persistence or anything like that. Um, so if you are going to add all those things in a native app, in my opinion, the level of complexity is about the same as doing it in like a web context now. Because with things like service workers, you can make your web app and
Right.
a hybrid app work offline just using web technology. And I think the challenges and complexities of doing it that way are very similar to the challenges and complexities of doing it the native way. Now, there are
Okay.
great arguments for using native apps. And if you're going to have like tight integration with stuff like GPS and all that kind of thing, and you need like a really high fidelity UI, which is not properly serviced by web technology. Like my favorite example to reach for is Uber. If you were building
Uh-huh.
Uber, which doesn't really need a web app, but it needs top-notch native apps, because like there is no use for an Uber website, but there like it's pretty much exclusively going to be used through mobile just because of the nature of the app.
Right.
That is when you go fully native because your entire business depends on the mobile app,
Mm.
and you need the best possible experience on it. But if you build like a CRUD app, which I think like I mean people won't like to admit it, but 80 or 90% of web apps are just CRUD apps, then y-
Yeah, it's
uh,
true.
yeah, then a well executed hybrid app using something like the Turbo Native or a similar philosophy will do absolutely fine.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to dive into more of the Hotwire stuff here. Um, so the codex, you actually build out an app.
Yeah, that's right.
So, like you said, it's almost more here's how to build an app with Rails, I guess.
Yeah, it is pretty much that. Like the fact that it teaches native apps and the fact that Hotwire is a core part are all just kind of add-ons to it. The core proposition is here are all the tools and techniques you need to build like modern Rails applications. because my vision for it was to be the next step after the Rails tutorial by Michael Hartle.
Uh-huh.
So, because that's how I learned Rails, and I think it's a rite of passage pretty much for every Rails developer to work through that book. But after I finished that book, I didn't know where to go next because it teaches you the basics and it does that really, really well. But you need a next step, right? Like, I didn't really know where to go from there. And I was learning quite a lot when I was just starting with my freelancing career and stuff like that. So I thought I'd put my slightly unique career trajectory of having specialized in mobile apps and then having switched to web um, to some use and write a book on how to build modern Rails applications, and as a unique selling point, throw in the native side of things.
Right. So yeah, so I guess one of the other cases that I know some people have to make is why then use Hotwire, Stimulus, and Friends instead of something like um, React or Vue or Angular or one of these other heavier duty front end systems.
Um, it's I'm not the best person to compare and contrast because I've never used React. So my pitch for it would be um, React and stuff have a very different philosophy.
Hmm.
They kind of take over your app's front end. You don't really write HTML and CSS, you write React code. And
It's true.
I don't really see the point of building modern web applications that way, in like with an all-in kind of approach,
Hmm.
because you just like the web platform gives you so much out of the box, and it just feels like React as a philosophy has said, we're going to take everything that the web platform gives you, throw it out the window, and then build it back, but worse. So, so that's just not a philosophy that I kind of buy into. I like writing HTML and CSS, and I like enhancing that with JavaScript. Um, I believe that HTML is a declarative UI programming language, which I know it's a statement that could start fights on the internet, but that's my stall. And the reason, like the Hotwire approach, kind of fits my brain so well is that philosophically it's exactly the same as it was building websites like 15 years ago when it was all jQuery and jQuery UI, when you still wrote HTML and CSS, but you had uh, this crappy procedural JavaScript code on top of that, kind of doing all the dynamic stuff. So we moved away from that, and we have, excuse me, much better uh, way to kind of structure JavaScript now. So we still retain the philosophy of you build your core UI in HTML and CSS, and then you enhance it with JavaScript. With Hotwire, with Turbo especially, you can get so far without writing any custom
Right.
JavaScript at all. Just data attributes on HTML take you so far. Because Turbo Drive in itself is just a huge performance boost because you're not doing full page reloads, you're only reloading the body element. And now with Turbo 8, you also get like prefetching. So when the user hovers over a link, it'll prefetch and cache the response. So when you click the link, it's almost instantaneous, the transition. And that's like without writing any JavaScript yourself at all. And then you throw in turbo frames into the mix, which kind of lets you break the page down into smaller chunks and then update those chunks independently of the rest of the page. Again, without writing any custom JavaScript at all. You just get so far
Hmm.
with so little. And let's say you have certain parts of your page where it's really, really interactive and you really need to build out something complex. then you would probably just throw in a JavaScript framework for that little piece. So, like,
Right.
let's say you were building like a car configurator, which is a really complex piece of work,
Hmm.
right? Because is lots of logic, lots of moving parts going about. So for that little island on the page, you'd probably throw in a framework. Like, I couldn't
Right.
tell you whether I'd pick React or Vue or whatever, because I haven't used them, so I couldn't tell you what I would use.
Hmm.
I'd need to research it. But you would choose a framework and throw it in for that tiny island on the page. But the majority of your website would still just be using HTML and CSS, just the way I think the web platform was designed to be used.
Right.
That's just my 2 cents on the whole thing. I think we've gone
No,
down
that
this
makes sense.
rabbit hole of complexity
Hmm.
that we just need to go back from a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple of things because I've done some React, and what I found is, yeah, I mean, you talked about the complexity, and you've talked about how it kind of takes over your page or takes over, whatever you put it into. One thing that I found is that, so typically when I see people building a React application, what they're doing is they are essentially working off of something like Prisma or um, some back end API system that just delivers an API, and then they build everything else on React. And that makes sense from the standpoint of, right, you're only learning one system, and so then you're building it out. Um, I found the whole process of putting together React components just to be really, really clunky. Um, and there are things I like about the idea of JSX, where you're putting your effectively from the Rails standpoint, you're putting your um, view controller and model in one file. But what I found is that people tend to still complicate that way more than it needs to be. And then the other issue is that, yeah, like you said, you're not really working in the web medium anymore. You're working in the React medium. And what I've gotten to love about Ruby and Rails and Hotwire is that um, I just add stuff in where I need it. I kind of enhance it where it makes sense, and then just kind of pull in the pieces where they tend to work well, and then I get to work in the web medium. So
Exactly. Something that I kind of learned back when I was a native app developer is that uh, if you fight against the platform you're working with, it's
mhm,
never going to go well. So, especially like on iOS, which I specialized in towards the back end of my stint as a mobile developer, because Android was just too fiddly, and I'm like, I can't be bothered with this anymore. Um, on iOS, there was a proliferation of really complicated patterns. Like, you know how tech goes, right? Things come in and
mhm.
out of fashion. So
Yep.
it was just becoming fashionable to use these really complicated patterns. Like, there's one called Viper, which I loathe with an unbridled passion. uh, and all those things did was they fought against what the iOS platform gave you.
Right.
So, like, the iOS runtime has a lot of similar philosophies to Ruby, like in terms of things like meta programming and quote unquote magic provided by meta programming. And all these patterns came in and said that, oh no, we're going to fight against a platform that gives you all these things and rebuild all of these ourselves by with these patterns and things like that. And it did my head in, because it just made simple code so much more complex. And I've kind of taken that learning into web development and said that if I ever find myself fighting against the browser, I'm probably not doing something right. I need to rethink my
Right.
entire approach. And that's kind of where I am with the whole React thing. I just feel that it fights the platform
Mhm.
instead of working with it.
Yeah, that tension's definitely there. I agree with you. So let's dive into what Rails and Hotwire give you here. Um, since I'm assuming that's why most people who are listening are listening. By the way, we have like 60 people on Twitter right now. I never say X because I feel dumb saying X. Um,
Yeah, I still call it Twitter as well.
so anyway, and everybody knows what I mean when I say Twitter. So anyway,
Yep.
um, So, in essence, I think the thing we've talked about the most is stimulus, right? On this show, just because I think it's kind of I don't know if it's necessarily the easiest to understand, but it's usually what we're reaching for when we're trying to have some kind of custom um, thing on our web page, right?
Yeah, exactly. Stimulus is the thing for which you'll actually write JavaScript code yourself.
Right.
Because Turbo is more just something you drop in and then you kind of call using data attributes in HTML,
Yeah.
unless you want to customize something. So yeah, Stimulus is where you actually write JavaScript.
Right. So I was going to say let's talk about Turbo here for a minute. So do you want to just give people an idea of what Turbo is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. So Turbo is actually made up of three parts itself: Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, and Turbo Streams. So Turbo Drive is like a natural successor to the library Turbo Links, which, if
Uh-huh.
anyone has worked with Rails for a number of years, would be familiar with. So it kind of builds on a concept called PJAX, which was, I think, pioneered by GitHub way back when. So the the core of Turbo Drive is that when you click a link, instead of like letting the browser do what it does, which is goes and gets the response, throws away the entire existing document, and then renders the response that it got from the server. Turbo Drive will intercept that that link click, and it'll make a fetch request uh, to the path, get
Hmm.
the response, and then just swap out the body element on the existing document for the one that it got from the response, and it'll merge the head. So you still have your document still stays intact. So if you want to store some state on it, you can. And it also helps with performance because you're not like throwing away the entire page and then downloading
Right.
CSS and stuff again. Although, I mean, that problem is a lot less obvious now with caching and HTTP too, but
Right.
it's still there. Visually, it does make a difference when the entire page isn't thrown away. And I think the biggest difference between Turbo Drive and the predecessor Turbo Links is that Turbo Drive works with forms as well. So Turbo Links was exclusively for link clicks, but for Turbo Drive, it does the exact same thing for form submissions as well.
Right.
And the one thing that when I've found myself in discussions with people who only ever use React is they say, but oh, well, what if you want a persistent element on the page? You can't do that with this approach because it's still a multi-page app. And Turbo actually has an attribute called data turbo permanent. So if you put that on an element, that particular element will be persisted across
Oh
page
wow.
loads. So like, so let's say you had like an audio player or something that was playing sound, but you wanted the user to be able to browse your website while that was still
Right.
playing. You just set this attribute on that element, and it would just be retained. It would still be there across all those multiple page loads. So you still have like a multi-page architecture, but you have the behavior of a single page application.
Right.
So I think that's a great approach to kind of just simplify your architecture.
Yeah,
So
that
that's
makes
like,
sense.
yeah, so that's like Turbo Drive. Turbo Frames kind of takes a similar concept but localizes it to like smaller parts of the page.
Hmm.
So let's say you have a page with a lot of content and then you have a turbo frame on one small part of the page. So that turbo frame is basically just a turbo dash frame HTML tag, which is implemented as a custom element. And then any link clicks or form submissions in that turbo frame will expect a corresponding turbo frame. So the ID of the frame that the call was made from, it would expect an ID, a turbo frame with that same ID in the
Hmm.
response. And then instead of replacing the entire body element, it would just replace the contents of that one frame. So you can
Right.
make very like you can decompose your entire page into smaller parts using turbo frames and then update just those parts. So that's just taking the whole turbo drive concept and making it a bit more powerful. And just these two things, I think, takes you so unbelievably far without writing any custom JavaScript.
Right.
Um,
Can
and then,
I ask a couple of
yeah, go on.
questions here on this? Because, well, for one, so you said Turbo Drive and I guess Turbo Frames as well, work on both link clicks and form submissions.
Yes.
So, I'm looking at the Turbo page. So, for example, it has like an edit this message link. So, if you click that link, it would just replace the contents of that frame with. I'm assuming your Rails just renders a partial with no layout, and it just drops it in there.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, you can either just render the partial with no layout, which would be the more performant thing to do. And I think there is a helper in the Turbo Rails gem
Uh
that
huh.
does set the layout to false if it's a turbo frame request, but I could be wrong there.
Okay.
Uh, but you don't have to do that, because all the turbo really wants in the response is a turbo frame with the matching ID. So you can have a full HTML document that you send back into the
Oh,
server, but turbo will only remove the corresponding turbo frame and then replace that. So your server
so you
can
just have to
be
get your
as
ID right.
yeah, you just got to get the ID right. You can send whatever back from the server as long as it has the turbo frame with the ID.
Okay, that makes sense. So one other thing, and we might dive into Turbo Streams here a little bit with it, but and I have to admit, like I said, um, I've done a bunch with Stimulus. I freaking love it. It feels so easy to follow along with when I'm doing stuff. But yeah, Turbo's kind of new to me. But I'm looking at this and I'm going, this seems like I think I've done some of this stuff with Stimulus, not realizing that Turbo did it for me. Um, so one other thing that I have a question about, and this is something I ran into last week. So I've kind of been looking for work lately. The contract I was working just slowed way, 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 way down. And so I applied to this other, it was kind of a contract, and they sent me basically I'm rambling. I'm talking way too long about this. But anyway, they told me to build them a sample app. And I spent, I think, 3 hours debugging Rails, sending a turbo stream request back when I submitted a form, and then not actually loading the page right when it got a response. Like I could see in the Rails server that it was hitting that back end endpoint and that it was doing the work to render the other page, but it was right, it wasn't rendering the page. And so I'm curious, if is there something fundamental with like just maybe I had the wrong ID on something, or didn't understand something fundamental about how Rails works with Turbo to manage forms that I did wrong? Because eventually I found the keyword. I can't remember which one it is, but the keyword to just turn it off. I think it was remote false or something.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah. So were you sending a turbo stream back from the server, or were you sending it just a full page?
I don't remember. It was requesting a turbo stream. It was showing up in the log as turbo stream,
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't remember if what it was
Um,
sending back.
because
Uh,
so Turbo has a requirement that on a form submission, you either render a turbo stream, so it has to have a MIME type of turbo stream,
oh,
or
maybe that's what I was doing wrong.
or or you have to redirect. You cannot you cannot render HTML on a form
Ah,
submission.
okay. So that's a feature of turbo streams.
It's a requirement of Turbo. So if you look in the Turbo doc somewhere, there is an explanation for it. I can't remember. It's
Okay.
something to do with clicking back. I can't remember the exact explanation. It's in the docs, but yeah, you have to either render a Turbo stream or redirect on a form submission. That's a requirement of Turbo Drive.
Okay. So what is a turbo stream then?
So Turbo Stream is also a custom element, so just Turbo Dash Stream, and it
Okay,
gives
hang on.
you
Time out for a second. So when
yeah.
you're saying I needed to return a turbo stream, I was still returning HTML. It needed to be in a TurboStream element.
It needed to be in a TurboStream element and needed to have a MIME type of whatever
Okay.
the thing is, VND, TurboStream, whatever it is, the actual
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, a TurboStream has to be in a TurboStream tag. That's what makes it a TurboStream, and that kind of gives you what I describe in my book as a scalpel to make fine-grained adjustments to your page. So Turbo Drive and Turbo Frames both have quite like general approaches to making updates. So you like either change the entire page or a whole portion of the
Right.
page. But let's say you want to target one tiny thing like a counter or something somewhere, and you want to change just that.
Mm-hmm.
So you would render a turbo stream with a replace action, and then in the content of the turbo stream tag, you'd put the new content, and then turbo uh, would use the target attribute of the turbo stream tag to find the element you wanted to change, and then the action you define is replace. So it'll replace the targeted element with the contents of the turbo stream tag. Now there are, I think, 7 or 8 CRUD actions that turbo streams give you out of the box. I think like append and replace and update. I can't remember all of them. It's in the docs. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the updates you can make using turbo streams to very specific elements that you target using either an ID or a CSS selector. Um, so you can make like really targeted adjustments to your page, but it's quite easy to let things get out of hand with turbo streams, because if you find yourself making quite a few updates, you're probably doing something wrong. It's really
Mm-hmm.
stuff that's really targeted, really fine grained, really one off, that you kind of want to be making with turbo streams. Because especially now with turbo 8, so I'm going to segue into turbo 8 a little bit,
Yep.
because everything we've spoken about so far has been in turbo in some form or the other since day one, which was Turbo.
Right.
Turbo came out with the version 7 to match Rails' version. So that's a bit counterintuitive, but I digress. Turbo 8 has this new feature called page refreshes using morphing. So a common pattern in Rails is you kind of make a change to an entity and then redirect back to where the user was. So let's say the user is on /posts, and you have an index of posts with like delete buttons, and the user clicks delete, and then the controller action will redirect the user back to posts where they already were. But obviously what they'll see is that one post that they deleted, it should now be missing because it's been deleted.
Right.
That's like it's a very small change on the page. So in the past, you would probably render a turbo stream that targets that particular post's entry. It'll probably be like an li element or something, and it removes it from the DOM. Or you would do like a full page load, which is obviously more expensive, and it's a bit jarring for the user as well, because like let's say it's a long list of posts and they scroll like halfway down and then they click delete and you do a full page load, it'll take you way back, right back up to the
Mm-hmm.
page, right? So Turbo 8 kind of attempted to solve this problem without adding any backend complexity, because if you use a turbo frame, you're adding more logic on the backend.
Right.
So it uses a library called idiomorph, and it uses that to just morph the new page into the old page. So by that, what I mean is it kind of makes a diff of the two DOMs, and then
Mm-hmm.
only makes updates for the things that have changed.
Right.
So you can opt into this on a page by page basis with a meta tag. So now, if let's take the same use case and you've opted into morphing page refreshes using the meta tag,
Uh-huh.
you do the exact same thing on the server. In the destroy action, you delete the post and you redirect back to the post index. But and on the server, obviously, you render the entire post index. But now
Mm-hmm.
what Turbo will do is, because you've opted into morphing, is that it'll diff the current DOM with the DOM it gets from the server and then just morph the two. So as a user, your scroll position will be retained, and all you'll see is that that one post that you deleted has been removed. So
Mm,
after this new addition, the the use cases for turbo streams, I think, just drops down significantly, and you only really want to be using it very sparingly when there is no other option, because it's the kind of thing uh, it's the kind of thing that I think you'd refer to as a sharp knife in
mm.
Rails. I know it's a phrase that's used quite a lot with both Ruby and Rails, and you want to be using them when the time is right and not just across the board, because it's quite easy to make a mess.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, I was at Rails World last year when David, I don't know why I always call him David instead of DHH, but um, when David was showing us Turbo 8 with that feature where I think what he did was he had like a Kanban board, and
Yes.
so he, he dropped in a new column and then removed it, and he showed the old behavior where when you would do that, it would jump to the top, and then afterward he said, now it doesn't do that basically. So
Yeah, I think that was from Jorge's talk actually. He's the guy who I think spearheaded the whole
uh-huh.
morphing effort, and I think that was the use case for which it was developed and then extracted into Turbo,
Right.
was I think that Kanban style interface in Basecamp, and I think probably Hey Calendar as well.
Yep.
So it might have been Hey Calendar actually, but yeah, it was that's the reason for which it was developed.
So Turbo Links is, or yeah, not Turbo Links, Turbo Native is a
Yeah,
wrapper around your web application.
essentially yes. So okay, let me zoom out a bit and explain exactly how Turbo Native works. So there are a few approaches to hybrid apps, because hybrid basically means you're mixing web technology with native technology and using both together.
Yeah.
That's where the term hybrid comes from.
Well, a
So
lot of apps do that though. We had an iOS show on this network for a long, long, long time. Went on hiatus in November of 2019, but that was one of the tricks. If you had some UI that wasn't, how do I put it? It wasn't exactly what Apple gives you in their UI kit, then yeah, a lot of people would pull in web technology and just seamlessly lay it in there to get what they wanted. So this isn't a new idea by any means.
it's not a new idea. I think what Turbo Native does is just standardizes it a little bit. So I actually gave a talk on this at a couple of conferences last year called "Native Apps Are Dead: Long Live Native Apps,"
Mhm.
because honestly astonished that the Turbo Native approach isn't more widely used. Because what it does is it builds the backbone of your app natively, so all the navigation and stuff like that, and let's say you have a tab bar, which most apps do. Those are all built natively.
Okay.
You're not gonna get away from having to write Swift or Kotlin. You're gonna have to write some
Okay.
native code. You're gonna have to have an Xcode project and an Android Studio project. But what Turbo Native does is that instead of like instead of you recreating each view in native code, within that kind of backbone that of the native elements, it renders web content. So you have your navigation bar at the top, you have your tab bar at the bottom, but in the middle where your content is, it's just a web view with HTML in it. Um, and that I think is really powerful, because stuff that's kind of just users expect out of a platform is just there. Like on iOS, when you kind of go forward through pages, you can just swipe from left to right to go back.
Hmm.
Stuff like that just works out of the box. So iOS just gives you that kind of stuff out of the box. And
Right.
since you're working with the platform, you get all that stuff for free. So Turbo Native just standardizes that kind of architecture. So it when you start up a Turbo Native app, it will install itself to the Turbo Native part of the library will install itself as an adapter on Turbo itself, which is the web part of things.
Okay.
And it kind of hooks into that whole mechanism to kind of trigger native code. So, like, let's say when you tap a link in a Turbo Native app, instead of just making a fetch request and replacing the current body, Turbo Native will now get the response, create another screen in like a view controller on iOS or a fragment on Android, and it will slide it onto the screen from right to left. So that's like Turbo Native, the library does that for you.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where it comes in. It's just a kind of like an adapter to help you build apps which render web content within this native frame, which I sometimes refer to as a custom web browser. So you're kind of just running your web app within a custom web browser that you've
Okay.
built yourself using native app technologies.
Gotcha. So I guess a couple of other questions I have are, just kind of the things that aren't built into your application. So, for example, what if you wanted in-app purchases, or, well, let's just talk about in-app purchases for a minute.
Right. So because you have a native project, your app is basically still an Xcode project or an Android Studio
Mhm.
project, and you are writing some Swift code or Kotlin code. You have access to all the native APIs.
Right.
So you can just write native code to do that. So like in-app purchases, for example, Apple would have APIs for that.
Right.
So you just write Swift code, and then you'd have some kind of way to communicate that to your web app. Either you're hitting an API or something like
Mm,
that. Like obviously the exact architecture would depend on your use case, but
right.
because like the native side of things has not been like hidden away or abstracted away, you can do anything native that you want.
I gotcha. So let's say that I have a button on my application, and when you tap the button on the web page, it takes you to the Stripe form. But on the native app, there's some way for me to trigger the native API that says this is an in-app purchase.
So that's where Strata comes into the picture.
Okay.
So um, both iOS and Android have native APIs that
Mhm.
let you communicate to and from JavaScript. So you can, from JavaScript, you can post messages, a quote unquote post messages that are received in native code. So you can like call like whatever the method signature is dot post and send some
Right.
JSON, and then
Okay.
a fully native a native method in Swift or Kotlin will be called with that JSON message that you sent from JavaScript.
Mhm.
And to go the other way, you can evaluate JavaScript within a web view. So from native code, you can like literally call like web view.evaluate JavaScript and pass in a JavaScript string, which will be executed in your web page. So Strata takes this pathway
Mhm.
and gives you an abstraction layer to communicate from web to native and vice versa.
Okay.
So it's built on top of Stimulus. So it's basically it gives you a concept of components. I think it's called a bridge component, which is a subclass of a stimulus controller, and it gives you just some standard methods to send messages to native apps. So you would
Okay.
have a component. So you need to subclass bridge component and create a component for yourself on the web, and then create a counterpart component in your native app using native code.
Okay.
And then the using Strata, the two would communicate with each other. Like on a podcast, it's kind of hard to go into the details because it all gets
No, it's
very
all good.
curry. But that's basically the gist of it. Is you have fully native components, and then the same thing on the web, and then they communicate with each other, and that's how you can send messages from the web to native and back. So your exact use case, we can accomplish that with Strata.
I gotcha. What about push notifications?
So you would have to write some native code for that. You need to like register your push notification token with your server and stuff like
Right.
that. It is fully native territory. So I wanted to write about that in my book, but uh, as I dug into it, we were going too far into fully native world, and I wanted
Right.
to stick to like just like web in the book. So it's the same um, kind of technique as you would use in a native app. You do it the same way. On the back end, again, you just need to Google like how do I send Apple push notifications from a Rails app and just follow the instructions. And I
Mhm.
think Rails 8 is actually going to have a framework called Action Notifier, which
Right.
kind of helps you send push notifications. I think both on the web platform and on iOS and Android.
Mm.
So that should hopefully make life a lot easier.
I feel like I lucked out that the other guys didn't show up because now I got to ask all my dumb questions. Um, so because yeah, I mean, this is all stuff that I've wanted to do for a long time that I just haven't done. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more necessarily that I need to dive into. Um, Rails uses a lot of the at least Turbo by default. I don't know if it pulls in Strata for anything since it's a native bridge, but yeah. So let's say that you were going to build like a complete ecosystem on your Rails app, right? So you were gonna and the thing that I keep dreaming of is kind of a Netflix for developers, right? So it's hey, you've got all this content from all these series, shows, podcasts, whatever, right? And so you can come in and you can get any content that we've either created or licensed, right? And so, building the Rails app, and then, I can totally see doing something with, say, Turbo, where it's like you click the play this video button, right? And then it just, replaces parts of the screen with relevant stuff. Or if it reloads it right, maybe it just does turbo drive and just, replaces the body, however I want to do that. So I can see a lot of ways that I can make that do what I want. Um, I'm pretty familiar with Stimulus, but I could build the native app, right? And just do turbo native and have it load up the video library. I guess one question I have is yeah, is there a way to do how would I do the offline mode if somebody wanted to watch one of those videos? So it's like,
Um,
hey, save this for later, right? I'm getting on an airplane.
Yeah, the best way to do it would be service workers because
Okay.
you're kind of already in the web world. So, like building out a full like native persistence architecture would be just a bit much, I think.
Right.
Yeah, service workers. That's how I'd do it.
So you just have service workers go basically download the video and
Yeah.
hold on to it.
Uh, I can't comment on exactly how that would work because I have a basic understanding of service workers, but I've never actually built
Right.
anything with it myself. But I'm like 99% sure that kind of use case is perfect for service
Yeah.
workers.
Fair enough. Um I'm also curious, and I think the answer to this is going to be you're going to have to ask the Turbo team because the other thing I'd like to do is expand it to other parts of the ecosystem that's out there. So lately, I've been looking at I have like 6 or 7 Fire TVs in my house, right? Fire Stick TVs, and so I'd like to, and you can load a web app in as your app, and so I'm wondering if Turbo Native. I'm assuming Turbo Native doesn't apply there, but I guess maybe it does because you can also run it as an Android app. You build it in Android Studio. So, do you know much about that, or
No, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but if it kind of works as an Android app, maybe you could adapt it. I don't know the APIs well enough because I mean Turbo Native is very much built, I think, with the assumption that it's going to be a mobile app. So if the APIs, if the native apps, the native APIs are the same, like it's still using like on Android, you have an
right?
activity and a fragment and stuff. If it's still using those same APIs, then it probably would work. But if it's different, then probably not.
Okay. Is there anything else that I didn't ask about that you think people are going to want to know about?
No, I think we've covered Turbo quite well. We could talk about stimulus if you want, but if you've covered that before, then um,
I think we have, and we're getting
yeah,
toward the end of our time anyway. We've already been talking for 53 minutes, so yeah. I'm also looking at
yeah.
bringing David, or not David, Nate Hopkins on to talk about some of the stuff that he just released. So we
Oh,
can get into
nice.
the
Yeah,
other stuff. Um, let's talk about the codex here for just another minute. So you talked about, you basically took 8 months off to write it. Um, if people want to buy it, they just go railsandhotwirecodex.com,
that's right.
and it's $99, but it'll walk you through writing the whole mess.
Yeah, so it teaches you all the Rails constituent frameworks, so like active storage, action mailbox, action cable, everything. And it doesn't just teach you how to use them, it gives you an understanding of how they work. So what kind of really annoyed me in most tutorials, it'll say that, okay, you want to get this working, write this code and it'll do what you want. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't understand. You haven't given me any understanding
Mhm.
of that code. You just said write this. So I wanted to make sure that every tiny bit of code that I teach in the book has an explanation of what it does and why I choose that approach,
Okay.
and if there are any alternatives, what they are. So like when you read the book, you should have not only a really good understanding of like the entire Rails stack, how it works, and the different ways in which you can use it, but also like certain alternatives that are not covered in the book are signposted. So like
Right.
I have a chapter on search which teaches search using Postgres's native full text search,
Right.
and there's an entire discussion at the end of that chapter about the different kinds of searches that Postgres offers, but that I didn't cover in the book. When you would use those kind of searches, and then it also has a discussion on like Melee search and Elasticsearch, and when you want to use those. So
Right.
like uh, all the questions that I kind of come up with in my head when I'm trying to learn, I've tried to answer all those questions because like I always find it quite frustrating when people don't cover things from all angles in a tutorial.
Right.
So I kind of wanted to. I know it's a cliche, but I wanted to write the book that I wish I had. So I've just tried to be as comprehensive as I could. I know that's kind of made the book quite large and maybe not quite as easily accessible just because of the size, but I kind of erred on the side of being comprehensive over the side of being succinct.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and push us into the the last part of our show, and that is picks, and then we'll wrap up. I'll go ahead and go first, and you can kind of get an idea of what's involved. So, picks are just shout outs about stuff that you like. I mean, that's essentially it. So some people show up and they pick a bunch of tech stuff. Other people show up and pick other stuff. I'm going to go ahead and throw out some picks of my own. So the first pick that I have, I always do a board game pick, and I'm going to pick a Dice Forge. So um, it's kind of an interesting take on deck building, except you're building dice um, instead of building a deck or a hand. And so what you wind up doing is um, every turn you get an option of either grabbing a die face or taking a card that gives you victory points and special abilities, and then you and you buy either one. So you either spend gold or you spend sun or moon tokens to get them. And then when you buy die faces, you pull the face off of your dice and put the new face on. And they're kind of like Legos that way. Very fun game. Played it last night with some friends of mine, and yeah, it has a board game geek weight of 1.97, which means it's fairly approachable for casual players. It went kind of fast too. I think we played it in 45 minutes, maybe maybe a little longer than that, but pretty close. And we were teaching our friends how to play it. So anyway, really enjoyed Dice Forge. And so yeah, if you want kind of a different take on how that works, then that's awesome. I'm gonna post to the YouTube and Facebook and stuff links to Board Game Geek and to Amazon where you can buy it. The Amazon link is going to be an affiliate link, just so you know. So if you buy it there, I get a little piece of the action. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It's just anyway. And then other picks. So I am on the tail end of a book series. And the book series, let me look it up on my phone. So I've been listening to it, and I picked other books by Brent Weeks in the past. This one's called Beyond the Shadows. The book it's the third book in the series. I'm trying to remember the name of the book series itself. Title details. There we go. It's the Night Angel series. This is the third book in the series. Anyway, I'm really enjoying it. It's about this kid who basically becomes an assassin, and there's magic and politics. And anyway, it's been really, really good so far. So I'm going to pick the Night Angel series. The first book in the series, if you're interested, is called The Way of Shadows. And it looks like there's a prequel that's 2 hours long too that I haven't read. So anyway, it's The Way of Shadows, and then Shadow's Edge, and then the last one is Beyond the Shadows. So yeah, really, really enjoying that. Looks like there might be another series that's a sequel to it, because it says Book 1, Kyler Chronicles, and Kyler's the main protagonist. So anyway, terrific book. Really enjoying that. And then, of course, just a couple of shout outs about Rails Geniuses. I'm going to start inviting experts to come in and talk to us in May. If you sign up before May, it's going to be me, and we're just going to chat about what you want to learn and who I can get on to be experts to show up to some of our calls and make sure that we're providing you kind of the value you want. I'm also going to let everyone know I'm still looking for, freelance contract or a full-time job if I have to, so that, I got to pay the bills. And finally, I got this set up Monday. So if you go to rubyrogues.com/premium and you sign up, it's $9 a month. You get all the shows without the ads. And I'm planning on putting extra content in there as well. So I was supporting the shows off of my contract income. And so I'm trying to find another way to do that too. And this seems like a good way. So, if we have 100 or so people sign up, then it should cover most of the costs of producing podcasts. So anyway, that's everything I've got. Ayush, what are your picks?
Right. So I think I'm going to start with a music pick, because if you're watching on the YouTubes and stuff, you can see a massive bookcase of CDs behind me, because I am still that rare breed that buys CDs and exclusively listens to music on CDs rather than streaming services. So I'm going to start with the
That's
band.
weird.
Yeah, and in my friend group, we find people who don't buy CDs weird. So I'm like part of a. It's definitely not a cult. It's not a cult. We never call it a cult.
That's what I say about my board game group.
So I'm going to start with a band called Life Signs, who actually I'm actually wearing a Life Signs t-shirt right now.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, they're a band I've been following for a couple of years, and they are just absolutely fantastic. And I'm constantly astonished that they are still playing in pubs to 100 people rather than theaters to a few thousand, because the level of the music is just unbelievable. It's just they've struggled to get the support of the industry, so I want to give them a shout out. So that's Life Signs. Highly recommend it to anyone who's into like rock music of any kind of description. I'm sure you'll like it. And I'll make a tech pick as well. So there's a, a Rails dashboard um, library called Avo, made by Adrian Marin, who
Yeah,
also
we've had
organizes
Adrian on
the.
the show before.
Have you? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
also
I'll
he also
I'll go hunt up that
organizes.
episode.
Yeah, he's just the nicest guy, and he also runs a friendly.rb conference in Bucharest. And I got to use Avo for the first time on my current client project, where we were shopping around for a few different admin dashboards, and Avo just kind of just blew the others out of the water. To be honest, like I played around with some others, and this was just the docs were unbelievably good. The UI is really good out of the box. Pretty much any question I had, I could put into the docs search, and I got an answer for it. Um, yeah, highly recommended. If there is an open source free version, and if you need something more involved, there are like paid versions as well. And yeah, avohq.io or something like that, I think is the URL. Yeah, highly recommend it for admin dashboards because yeah, I'm using it right now.
Yeah. The URL that I have is avo.cool, but it redirects to avohq.io.
Okay, nice. That's a good URL.
So yeah, I'll drop that in the comments. If you're on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook, you'll see it show up in the comments. Unfortunately, Twitter, which is where most people are watching this, doesn't do the comments. So anyway, go find us on YouTube, and you can get it on the recording of the live stream, and that's at youtube.com/@topenddevs. Cool deal. If people want to connect with you, Ayush, they have questions for you, anything like that, where do they find you?
So best way is probably email or Mastodon. So my email is Ayush, AYUSH, at radioactivetoy.tech. That's my business website as well,
That is a
Radioactive.
cool domain.
Cheers. Yeah, that's my business website as well, radioactivetoy.tech. And I'm on Mastodon at Ayush at ruby.social.
All right.
Those are probably the best ways. I do have Twitter, but I honestly don't use it a whole lot these days. So you may or may not get a response if you ping me on there. So email or Mastodon is the best.
All right. Good deal. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thanks for coming. This was fun.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'd love to chat about Bridgetown some other time as well. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's really
absolutely. Well, we'll get you on for sure.
sounds good. Thanks very
All
much.
right. Till next time, folks. Max out.